Hello, my name is Jessica Moreau, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today to talk about qualitative analysis and rapid turnaround projects. There's a common myth out there, perhaps you've heard this one, and that is that qualitative work just takes too long. Qualitative methods we know are critical for understanding the how and the why of complex phenomena in health research. However, this perception that qualitative analysis just takes too long, well, it hampers its potential contribution to informing pragmatic, quality improvement, and any kind of rapid turnaround work. So one solution to this problem is rapid analytic methods. Today I'm going to talk to you about a two-step set of techniques for rapidly analyzing qualitative data. This has been developed in the Veterans Health Administration over the last 8 years or so. It's been tested and refined on both large and small projects and with all different kinds of qualitative data sources as well. We found it to be flexible and adaptable, and it guides the development of rigorous and reliable preliminary findings. So today we're going to talk about three main objectives. What are rapid analytic methods? What are they good for? And then we're going to talk about that two-step method. The first step is how to create templated summaries. And then the second step is how to analyze those summaries in matrices. All right, well, let's start with what are rapid analytic methods and what are they good for? Rapid analytic methods are systematic methods for organizing and inventorying your data. They can be done more quickly than other methods of analysis, and they can even be done on a rolling basis as the data collection happens. This process tends to work best as a team-based process, although it is possible to do it on your own with only one other person to give you some input. And the result are preliminary results within a very rapid time frame. Now, with projects that have a longer time frame, rapid analytic methods are also useful. They can be used as a first step before more traditional methods of analysis like coding. And the great thing about rapid methods is that they do not preclude further engagement with your data. So it's not like if you use rapid methods, then you can't go on to do any other kinds of coding or other more traditional forms of analysis. They make a great first step, even on your longer projects. So, what can rapid analytic methods do for you? What they do is they give us an overall sense of what you have in your data set. Kind of think of it like a bird's eye view. So, it can reveal strengths and weaknesses in the data. It can show you where you have areas where there are tons of information, and then areas that are a little thinner. Also, rapid analytic methods are really good at suggesting areas for further targeted analysis. Also, what rapid analytic methods give you in the end are preliminary findings. So because the analysis does happen on a much shorter time frame, and we're not going to be getting into the data on quite the same fine-grained method that you can using more traditional methods. So that's what we call these are preliminary findings. What are they good for? So rapid analytic methods you use anytime you need to be able to say something about the data sooner rather than later. For example, let's say you're tailoring an intervention in progress and you need to make some course corrections. Rapid analytic methods, those preliminary findings can help you make intelligent corrections to an intervention that's happening in real time. These methods also give preliminary feedback to leadership. Let's say leadership needs a PowerPoint presentation to find out what you're learning while you're learning it. This is a great way to come up with those bullets. Also, they work really well for progress reports, for funders. They're great for rapid responses to changing real-world situations. I don't know, maybe a pandemic or something. And also for conference abstracts. Rapid analytic methods will definitely give you enough to write really good conference abstracts, and you can get those in on time even if you haven't had time to do the more traditional forms of analysis. Finally, Rapid analytic methods help you identify paper ideas. So for example, what is that low-hanging fruit that you want to use for further targeted analysis? This will help show you that. All right, so then, what are rapid analytic methods less good for? They're not as good for the in-depth, nuanced treatments of the data. We're not really going to be going in that far. We don't have that much time to go there. And so as a result, if you want to publish a peer-reviewed paper, usually you are going to need to code. That is, you're going to need to get further into the data than what just doing summaries and matrices are going to reveal for you. Now, I have broken this rule, and it is possible. I can talk about that more later, but in general, we like to say that if you're going to be publishing a paper, in general, you're going to want to code. All right, so let's talk about this two-step process. The first step we call templated summaries. So this is a way of creating a summary within a standardized form or a template. So first we're going to need to create that template. Then we're going to test drive the template with our team to make sure it works well. And then finally, you divide up the whole data set, and the entire data set gets summarized within these templates, one summary per data collection episode. For example, one summary per interview. For step 2, we're going to do something called matrix analysis. We're going to choose the domains and the interviews for the analysis. We're going to create a matrix table shell, and I'm going to show you how to do this. And then we're going to populate that shell from our summaries. And finally, we're going to read and discuss the matrix with our team. All right, let's do step 1. How do I create templated summaries? A templated summary is a short 1 to 2 page sketch of a data collection episode, for example, an interview or a focus group, something like that. I'm going to use the example of an interview because that's really common, but really these can be used for any different kind of data collection episode. So the summary describes what happened in that interview, just in a nutshell. It uses a standardized form, which we call a template, so the information can be compared across the interviews. And it can be written. You can do a summary based on interview notes. You can do it based on your audio recordings, or if you have time, you can do it based on the transcripts. Doing summaries based on your transcripts are going to be best. These are going to be the highest quality summaries. You're going to have, all the information that you need, but it is possible to use either interview notes or a combination of interview notes and audio recordings as well if you don't have time to wait for your transcripts. And as I mentioned, we're going to do one summary per interview. So to create this summary template, we need to set up the standardized form that we're going to use for summarizing all the interviews. Now this is going to be based on your interview guide. So you need to go back to your interview guide, read it in order, and write one neutral domain name for each question or set of questions, depending on how many buckets you want and how fine-grained you want to get with it. You're going to list these domain names in the order that they were asked in the guide and leave spaces with bullets under each one. Let me show you what that looks like. So here is a generic project interview summary template. We've got sections for our interview ID number, the date of the interview, and then also who's doing the summary. So if our first question was something like, tell me about your job role and how long you've been doing it, that might be your first domain. As you can see, there's 2 bullets. Now, 2 bullets are just placeholders. Use as many bullets as you need when you're doing your summary. And again, the next question or the next set of questions is going to be your next domain and some blanks under that. Now down at the bottom, I always like to use these 2 domains pretty much no matter the project. First of all is other. So if something comes up in the interview that is interesting and relevant, but it doesn't fit within the domains, you can put it there. If the interview has some particular strengths and you don't want to forget, like, oh yeah, that was that one interview that was really good with this, that, or the other thing, you put that in other as well. Finally, we've got great quotes as our last domain. So that's what you're reading along and there's just this amazing quote, and it just says it perfectly. You know it. If you've worked with qualitative data long enough, your sensors will go off. You will be like, oh, that's a great quote. So this is where you can put it, and you can actually just copy it straight into your template from the transcript. And so that means you won't lose it. You'll know where that is later if you want to use it in a paper, or if it was something that really sparks something for you. You're not going to forget it this time. All right, so here's some example domains. Let's say we're doing employee interviews or provider interviews. Some domains might be participant job role or the patient subpopulation needs. For example, we might ask, what are the top, if your interview guide says, what are the top 3 needs of this particular patient subpopulation? Your domain would be patient subpopulation needs. We often ask about things like current clinical practices. That's a great domain. Effectiveness of the current practices. Comparison of old versus new practice. If we're doing an interview to get feedback on a proposed or potential intervention, you can have a domain that says feedback on and then whatever aspect of the intervention you're asking about, or something like, suggestions for change. Now, if we're doing patient interviews, again, this is going to be based entirely on your interview guide. But for example, just what these domains might look like. If we're asking for the patient to give us just an overall experience with a program that they participated in, the domain would be overall experience with program. Barriers and facilitators. Preference for example, a delivery option like in-person or virtual delivery, or women-only or mixed gender delivery, something like that. Or sometimes we ask patients, what advice would you give other patients? And that can be a domain as well. So once you get your first draft of your template all set, you need to test drive your template. So all team members are going to use this draft template to summarize the same interview. And you're going to be asking yourself during this process, does the template work? Does it need edits? Are the domains intuitive? Are they findable in the data? It should be pretty easy. They should jump right out at you. Also, are there any domains missing, or maybe they're incorrectly labeled? And just finally, is the template easy to use? Summarizing shouldn't be challenging. It should be a pretty straightforward process, so you want your template to be really easy to use. Then you're going to standardize across your team. So everyone has summarized the same one interview individually, and then you're going to compare all those summaries of the same interview. Everyone will look at them together and you can discuss differences that you notice in summarizing styles. And there's no one right way to write a summary. The most important thing is that it's got to line up with your goals. What do you want to get out of this exercise? So talk about this with your team, standardize your style across your team member, and very, very importantly, you need to agree on the level of detail based, again, on your analytic goals of the project. Some summaries, if it makes sense, are a lot more general. Some summaries are a lot more detailed, in particular in certain sections. And again, that all has to be decided as a group in conversation with your PI all together to make sure that everyone's doing it the same. So finally, once everything's all standardized and set up, you just divide up all the interviews in your data set among the team members, and everyone goes off. And you use that summary, that final summary template for each interview. So as each team member finishes a summary, they post it, say, to a shared folder when it's complete. And then it's nice to have a team lead to check the quality of the summaries, look through them, make sure they're all looking about the same, and work with anyone who's having trouble. So the result is a file folder, basically, with a library of summaries. If you want, let's say you have a new team member, someone who just comes on, or else someone who hasn't been involved in the qualitative data collection, instead of having to read all those transcripts or listen to all those audios, they can just sit down with this library of summaries and read a nice, succinct 1 to 2 page summary of each of the interviews. I have lots of tips for writing summaries. I'm just going to share the best ones here. The most important thing is that writing summaries is not an interpretive task. All you are doing is just paraphrasing. You're just summarizing what is there. So if you find yourself thinking too hard, trying to figure out what would they really mean by this, just stop. Just paraphrase what you see. Each bullet is one data point. This is really important. Think of it like a data nugget, just one per bullet. And you want to keep your bullets really short, so no complete sentences. Use abbreviations that your team uses and knows, and keep them really, really succinct. So the bullets should be as short as they possibly can be, but still be understandable on their own within the context of the domain. All right, so we finished our summaries. We've got this nice library. Now what are we going to do with them? Maybe the summaries themselves are enough. Maybe that accomplishes what you need. Usually though, we're going to go on to a second step and we're going to analyze these summaries in matrices. So matrix analysis is a way of looking and thinking across all of your summaries. It visually organizes selected content from the summaries in one place, and it facilitates identifying patterns or themes in your data. How do these matrices work? Well, you choose 1 to 4 domains, usually to focus on, based on what you want to explore first. You can do any number of matrices, so just start in one place. You're going to make a table shell in a Word doc. You can use Excel. They are harder to read. So I try to stick to Word if at all possible, just because Excel wasn't designed to display a lot of text. The interviews are going to run down the page along the y-axis, and those domains that you selected are going to run across the page on the x-axis. And then, once you have that set up, it just becomes a cut and paste project from your summaries to populate the matrix. Okay, here's an example of a matrix shell. You've got your project name at the top, your matrix number, since we're going to be doing multiple of them. I like to put down a couple words about why I chose this particular set of interviews and this particular set of domains, what we're trying to understand with this matrix, and then the date. So as you can see, the interviews are running down the page along the left, and for this one, this is an example of looking at 2 domains. They're running across the page. And choosing your domains and your interviews for analysis is really important. You want to do this really, really thoughtfully. For the domains, like I said, 1 to 4 is usually a good number to start with, and there are domains that you want to look at alongside each other to help draw connections, or maybe you're going to try to test a hypothesis. For the interviews, very often you're probably going to want all your interviews, but you can also choose a subset, or you can organize the interviews by site so that it facilitates looking at them in chunks as you run down the page. Now, the domain and the interview choices are a key part of the analytic process. There are many potential matrices for any data set, and you're going to create as many matrices as you need to answer your questions. So different arrangements and different combinations of domains and interviews are going to reveal different things about the data. So this is how we read a matrix. I like to start down. Read down the page to see what different participants said about the same domain. Do that for domain 1, then read down the domain 2 column, keep going until you're done. Now you want to read across the page to see what one person said about the domains that you chose that you want to compare. Then finally, read in a zigzag pattern to start making connections between the domains. So the tan arrows are the first step of the down reading. We're going to read all the way down the domain A column, and then all the way down the domain B column, and you can even put little notes down at the bottom. Observations, things that jump out at you. Then you go over to the side by the yellow arrows, and you're going to read across the domains and say what one person said about multiple domains. And then finally, the red arrows are that zigzag pattern. This is where you're starting to look for connections. So as you're doing this reading, you're making observations about the matrix. You're observing overall patterns, similarities, differences in the data. What do you notice? What surprises you? What is the range or variation like in the responses? What sorts of things do you see coming up again and again? Maybe not in the exact same words, but some possible themes that might be emerging. Also, consider different ways of grouping, interpreting, or making sense of the responses as a whole. So this is a great time to bring in your team. Hopefully everyone has read the matrix individually, and then you come together, read it together, and make observations together. So compare your observations to that of your teammates' observations. Everyone, regardless of training or experience, can contribute. So if you're working on a multidisciplinary team, this is a great way to pull in members from the quantitative side of your team. Even people who have never worked with qualitative data before can read a matrix in the down and then the cross and then the zigzag, and can just tell you what they're noticing. Use those observations to choose a different set of domains or interviews for your next matrix, and then just keep repeating that process with more matrices. So this is usually where I get this question where people are like, that's it? That's all there is to this? Yes and no. There is no magic to interpreting matrices. They facilitate your ability to read across the summarized data, to wrap your head around all this relevant information, and to see the patterns that would otherwise be difficult to identify in this mountain of data if you're just, reading through transcripts. The matrix, this is really important, the matrix does not analyze the data. You and your team analyze the data. So it's very, very possible and very likely that different people may come up with different interpretations about what they're seeing in the same matrix. However, some interpretations are going to be better supported and substantiated than others. So use this team-based process to check your interpretations and to build consensus with your team about what you're really seeing. What are the messages that are really coming out of these matrices, and reflect what you can describe as preliminary findings from your data set. So just to look back over what we covered today were what are rapid analytic methods? What are they good for? Also, what are they less good for? And then we talked about this two-step process. The first step was creating templated summaries. And the second step was how do you analyze those summaries in matrices. And if you go to your workbook, you're going to find example templates, example matrices, things you can fill out to help you integrate these methods in whatever you're working on right now that's requiring some quick turnaround. So next up, we're going to have live discussion and questions. I'm looking forward to talking to you. If for any reason you feel like you don't have time to stay or you didn't get your question asked, please feel free to email me, jessica.moreau@va.gov. Thank you so much.